again, I don't know where I was on that particular list, but when I got the call, I was of course honored, flabbergasted. I knew Buffy from pop culture, but not necessarily episode for episode. And a little known fact, I was only going to be around for those for Joss's first 4 issues. That's all I was going to do. And Scott Alley, rightly so, took me aside and said, "No, trust me, this is bigger than you think right now. As soon as you meet those fans, and as soon as you realize how rabid they are, you're going to want to stay on this." And true to his telling, I was flabbergasted and have not been off the book since. So it's going to be, we were talking about this, about 5 years now. 5, 6 years once the season's over that I've been on this particular book, almost just as much as the show was on the air. So it's, I'm now a fan, wasn't a fan before, very much a fan.
Yeah, I was definitely a fan before. I worked with Joss on Dollhouse, and you know, there are so many times in the room where between Joss and Tim Minear and Jane joined us, that they were talking to shorthand about Buffy and Angel. So I would always come home from work and rewatch stuff just so I could know what they were talking about and referring to, and became a fan all over again. And then when Joss approached me, it was one of those moments where I'm like, how can I say no? A chance to play in that playground that you were lucky enough to play in. Yeah, it was an awesome opportunity.
Jane helped build that playground.
Yes.
Well, I joined in season 3, so there was a whole lot of that jungle gym already built. So.
And actually, to that point, for you and Andrew, coming into writing comics, Jane, you've been doing it for a while now, but coming into writing comics versus writing television, what was about the spirit of the show, and also just sort of, just television in general, did you want to bring to comic storytelling?
Oh, well, for the first one, it's a very different process, and it took me a long time to feel any sort of competency with writing comics because it's so visual, and you have to be so precise. Like in TV, you can just write a page of dialogue and just, oh well, the director and the actors know these roles, and they'll come up with great blocking, and the facial expressions will say it all, and they'll find layers I'm not even thinking of. In comic books, you have to write what do you choose that snapshot to be? What are their faces doing? What exactly is this moment? And it's much, much harder. What I brought, so I was adding more than I was bringing. I was learning more than I was bringing. I guess what I brought is just like, I love dialogue, and I think comic books, because they are much more of a visual medium and they're less about the dialogue, I wanted to keep Joss, the way Joss had kept his respect for the characters still sounded like them, and really paid attention and worked hard to find the funniest joke and all that stuff. I wanted to bring that. And I always like it when, you sort of refer to the actor. And so I sort of wanted to bring that in there, that unlike many comic books, this comic book comes with the audience knowing exactly what the actor looks like that played that role, and what their physiology was, and how their voice sounds, and all sorts of things that you don't normally know, and sort of reference that stuff and try to keep that sense of that there's a flesh and blood human being playing this part, trying to keep that alive. That's all I got.
A lot of what Jane said, but definitely writing a comic book, there is so much more that you have to put on the page, and so much more you have to think about, and so much of it, you're thinking about things in television, the director, the production designer, the costumer, all these things that someone else would be, taking care of, that you'd be, talking to them about. You're splitting that job with the artist and trying to give them the basis, so, then George can step in and decide the best way to draw something. And, I mean, ultimately, I think George is the one who's the actor, and he's the one who's taking the dialogue and giving it life, because it is when you're writing dialogue for living, breathing actors, you can actually talk to them about the scene, and they have ideas of what they want to bring to it. And when you're just writing something that's going to be on the page, that's not necessarily the same, and you have to rely on the artist to bring a lot of that. So, it's a lot more work, and between the writer and the artist, I think you're doing a lot of jobs out on television that would be spread out amongst a lot.
Yeah, I think with Jane, what you were saying, you're very dense as a writer coming into this comic medium as a TV writer, screenwriter, and the scripts tended to be a little more dense because they're very description heavy. What I've found, and I don't know if it's to my credit or the credit of a good artist, a lot of the scripts have become a lot lighter. Like there's only 1 or 2 little descriptions. I've noticed Andrew saying, oh, by the way, they're going to go down into the deeper well and they're going to do this and whatever, and that's it. And you're like, okay, well, now I got to think about that. And you go into it, and obviously if there are questions, you definitely go to your writer, but I think as you become more comfortable, you get that dialogue, like you were saying with Jane and everybody coming to the dollhouse. They have that shorthand already instituted there.
I think that comes with getting used to also a relationship with a creative team. I know that for me with Rebecca, I've gotten to where a lot of times will just go so shorthand that Scott will say, will you please just, remind her that this person is carrying an axe, because I'll get to like page 5 and I'll say, oh yeah, can you give Faith an axe somewhere on page 1, but I do also think that what I find interesting, having read different people's scripts for this series, like Josh being a director as well, when he writes for you, George, he will, say medium shot, 2 shot, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't do that because I'm not a director. I did actually, my wife and I wrote for Law & Order SVU, and that was a little bit different because on that show, when they shoot an episode of Law & Order, they literally, what's not on the soundstage, they'll block off an entire city block, and this set would be this location, and then up the block is another one. So you almost have to write it in such a way that a scene that takes place in a drugstore can be switched to a bodega, or you know what I mean, if that's what happens. It's much more, I think, dialogue dependent, and in comics, I always try to remember that it is a visual medium, and let's try to have something interesting happening on a page, not gratuitously, like let's have an explosion here in the background just for the hell of it, but what is the most interesting locale for this? Can they be, I do a lot of Angel and Faith talking on rooftops because it's cool, and because Rebecca went to London and took a lot of cool pictures that she can use as reference. So, I think that is an important thing to remember when going from one to the other, is in comics there are no limits. You want to do some interesting visual stuff and take advantage of that.
Well, sometimes, and I know it's funny because Joss brought up an example that I later was talking to Brian K. Vaughan, who's another writer who wrote the Faith arc for season 8. We were sitting down and just sort of talking, oh, how cool is it to work with Joss? Oh yeah, it's so cool. And I'm like, but there was something I didn't get in one of his descriptions, and apparently this is more of a television writing. In one of the panel descriptions, he said, okay, I want a cowboy of these 2 guys, and they're doing this, this, and this. And Brian was like, yeah, what the hell is that? I don't know what that means. And apparently, I don't know, Jane, you can give it a more defined.
That goes down and includes your hips where your guns are.
Yeah, didn't know that at all. So I had to ask Joss, what's a cowboy? Are they wearing costumes?
You should go back and draw all those panels.
This is what you wanted, right?
I don't know, Buffy Western would be pretty bizarre. So actually stepping back a little bit from process and just sort of talking about the characters in this world, obviously, 6 p.m. panel on a Saturday night and every seat is full. What do you guys think it is about these characters in this world that has really sort of stood the test of time and has sort of not only continued to expand on the experience that existing fans had in watching the show, but new fans like yourselves and coming into these positions and writing and whatever, has brought people in and still been compelling, in today?
I think it's the universality, the human universality that Joss brings to all his shows, all his characters, whether they are in the future in space, or in high school, in the present day, or the Hulk. I think that it speaks to everyone. I think in 50 years or 100 years, when everyone's going to school on the internet, Buffy will still speak to people because of who the characters are. They live and breathe, and that's why people care about them so much. And I think you were saying something earlier, Jane, about how so many young men have come up to you and said how much the show meant to them.
Yeah, for a long time we got letters, and young women would come up to us, the writers, and I'm sure the actors too, and say, I only got through life, I only got through high school because of Buffy. And then suddenly it was all young men saying that, realizing they had identified with Buffy, and because the metaphor was always so clear, she's got this secret, she can't tell people who she really is, but she knows she's secretly awesome, and maybe someday I'll be allowed to blossom, but right now I kind of have to be scared and not let people know that I'm not slaying. And all those guys tapped into that metaphor and found strength in Buffy, and I think that is part of what you're talking about, the universality of the human experience, and the fact that the show had a reason to exist. This show had a message for young people that went beyond even what we realized it was saying, to tell people get high school as hell, but you can get through.
Yeah. And I mean, I think like this is something that like Joss always would say like, on Dollhouse, and I'm sure he'd say it on Buffy, but he'd always ask, well, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? And if you didn't have an answer to that, you knew you were sunk, because you knew your pitch was just going to die. But even now, it's always asking, you know, you send an email, talk about an art in the comic book, and he's always just trying to reduce it to what does it mean? What's the reason we're telling this story? And I think he's always so careful about having a reason to tell a story that's why people, you know, connect to it so much, is because we're not just telling a story because it's cool or it's fun. It's because there is a deeper reason.
Yeah, I think also more than that too. This Buffy the Vampire Slayer is a show that is entitled alone. Because I run into so many people, I do a lot of obviously Buffy shows, and this could easily be Willow, a show, or a Xander show, or a Spike show, or when Angel was on. There are so many characters that people have fallen in love with.
Jonathan, you could be Jonathan.
Jonathan, Andrew, sure. But it's funny because I do run into a lot of people who say they don't even like Buffy, but they love the show because this was something where everybody can find something of everything they love about themselves or somebody they knew or somebody they wish they knew in one of these characters.